everybody. We're going to start in just a couple minutes. We have a few people still coming in, and you are in the session, as you can see on the screen, Maximizing Your Benefits Package, the single benefit dollar. And as I said, I guess, you know what, let's just go ahead and start. And I would start, maybe the two of you should introduce yourselves, and we'll just start. This is being recorded. You will get the materials. We'll post them on the website afterwards, and the recordings will go up as soon as we've cleaned it up a little bit. So you can relax and listen, and don't worry so much about taking notes if it's easier for you to concentrate that way.
Perfect. Thanks, Martha. I'll start. My name's Brandon Burrows. I'm with Bolton & Company. I'm one of our senior vice presidents of employee benefits. So excited to be here sharing with you all. I do have a 2-year-old and newborn in the house. So if you hear little girl screaming, it's because it is little girl screaming in our house. But thanks for jumping in and joining. Jamie, do you want to do a quick intro and then we'll dive in?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I think it's Monday. My name is Jamie Greenleaf from Cafaro Greenleaf, and I'm the lead advisor here at the firm, and we specialize in retirement plans.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. So we're excited to be here with you today. As we were talking through this, kind of the idea behind this presentation was, and I'm excited to be doing this with Jamie, is to kind of merge the two worlds of retirement planning and employee benefits, and kind of try and speak a little more holistically to what are we doing with our benefit dollar. So we all have limited budgets and resources. So where are we putting that, and where are the areas where we could share some ideas or feedback from what we're seeing out there. Before we start, we did have one quick polling question, so I'd be curious to hear what you all think on this, as well as if you have a write-in answer, I guess you can put that in the chat. But I'm going to try and start this poll, and hopefully it shows up on your screen.
Yeah.
Perfect. So it's asking what are your biggest challenges in your organization's total compensation package? So is it challenges with recruiting? Is it managing multi-generational workforces? Is it the cost of health insurance? Is it educating employees, communicating the value of what you're providing, or providing adequate compensation in light of the cost of living in California? I know that's something we hear a lot about. So I think you can only select one. So it looks like we have about 40% of you have put in answers. So go ahead and click that. It's like we're pretty close. We're about 80%. So I'll share. I don't think you can see the results on your end. I'll share. It looks like the number one response is providing adequate compensation for cost of living, about 50% of you. So that was your top concern. Number two is the cost of health insurance. It's about 13 of you, or 41%. And then the others kind of just have a couple responses. So not surprising. I know that when we, okay, there, now you can share the results. When we were talking with Martha about this presentation topic, the issue of cost of living is such a challenge, I know, in all these different areas. So in certain areas of Southern California, certainly in Northern California as well. I don't know if we're going to solve the housing challenge in the next 45 minutes in California, but I do think that's something we have to acknowledge and be mindful of. Insurance is a big piece, and we'll talk about that. But I know that cost of living is certainly a big concern for a lot of our schools, especially for entry-level teachers who are trying to make their budgets work. I'm going to hand it off to Jamie to address some of the concerns around retirement planning and some goals in that area. So you can take it away, Jamie.
Great, thank you. Well, I have to applaud all of you guys. You're really forward thinkers here, getting together and and continuing the education even amidst all that's going on. So congratulations on that. Cafaro Greenleaf, just to step back, was actually founded by my mother back in 1981, and our mission's always been to help hardworking people retire with dignity. But today, that's becoming a little bit different than it used to be. We all used to be in silos. Insurance wasn't in a silo, retirement plan wasn't in a silo, housing was in a silo, and now we're kind of all coming together. Brandon, I'll ask you to switch to the next slide. So I love this slide because this is what I think of when I think of employers trying to pull all the pieces together. You've got all these pieces and you have to figure out how to put them properly back into the car to get the car from point A to point B. The challenge, though, is that we're not all driving the same car. Today, all of us are looking for unique features. So it's not just about getting our employees and staff from point A to point B, but it's actually in developing different features for each employee type. And as we start to look forward to the next slide, we're seeing this shift. The shift really from the employer taking on the responsibility from a defined benefit plan, like an old pension plan where when you retired you knew exactly what you were receiving, to more of a defined contribution plan where the employer is going to define what they're putting into your 403B or 401k plan, and you as an employer are going to determine what you want to save and what your goal is. Same thing on the health care. We're starting to see kind of that HMO, PPO, consumer-driven environment. And with this shift, yes, we're shifting the risk to the employee off of the employer, to allow customization. Because as we start to look at our population of people, it's not about everybody fitting into the box. I'll ask you to flip to the next one. I love Heinz because, you know, they've taken a fantastic product and they've had to be forward thinkers and be innovative. And, you know, it used to be you had the ketchup bottle that you had to hit on 57 or you stick a knife up in it. And they realized that it wasn't the ketchup, but it was the bottle. So they changed the process so that it made it really simple for somebody to get ketchup on their hot dog. Today, my kids actually are using blue and purple Heinz ketchup. So they're reinventing themselves again and thinking about how do we get the next generation to want to use Heinz ketchup over the multiple ketchups out there. So again, as an employer, we're looking at how do we take our benefit dollar and ultimately to maximize the benefit to all the different generations within the organization. I think we have a polling question as our next. So real quick, given the choice, do you think an employee would choose an additional compensation or is benefits more important to them? Why does an employee come to work for you and or stay at your organization?
So that's pretty good. I think there's about 80% or so in, so I'll share those results.
Great. So interestingly enough, most of us believe that it's because of additional compensation, that they would take additional compensation over benefits. However, what we've actually found is that 80% of the workers out there would keep their job over benefits over salary. So in other words, an employee would come to work for you and or remain with you because of the benefits that you're offering. So they really see compensation as important, but it's the benefits. Can they work from home? Do they have good health insurance? Do they have a retirement plan? Do they have things like helping us with college tuition repayment programs? What type of benefits are employers offering today? And if we move to the next slide, I think the difficulty as an employer is trying to build these benefits across the different generations within your organization. Within the organization, you have multiple generations, But you also may find that there are different cultures. If you flip to the next slide, you know, how we interpret work. Is it a button down or button up, or are we more casual? Maybe how we work differently. And we might ingest or digest technology different. How are we consuming information? If you flip to the next slide there. So all of these pieces are things that you as an employer need to take into account when you start to think about building your benefit package. And all of this comes with a cost. So many of our employers will say to us, Jamie, you know, I have $10,000 per employee to build a benefit package for them. What's the most meaningful and relevant way that I can spend that dollar? And that's a really good question. So today we're going to give you some ideas. Let's start with the retirement side of it. So I think one thing that's happened, moving from the pension plan where we defined the benefit that the employee was going to have when they left the school, they knew exactly what they were going to receive, to now defining the contribution, what the school is putting into the 403B or 401A. We've made it easier though. We're now not asking people to join to the retirement plan. We're asking them to opt out if they don't wish to participate. So we've added those auto features, auto enrollment to get them saving, auto escalation to keep them saving and increasing their contribution. And for those employees that may have opted out in the beginning, we have that auto re-enrollment. We're soliciting them every year and saying, hey, are you sure you don't want to participate in this great benefit? We've given them additional tax benefits. So now it's not just participating in pre-tax, now we're offering Roth because Roth may be a better option for your employees. Some employers are actually auto-enrolling into Roth provisions depending on the group that the group of employees that they have. We're reducing plan leakage. So we're limiting the amount of loans that people can take out because we recognize that this is a benefit that we want to protect. You know, when I first started in the business almost 30 years ago, the big selling point of the 401ks was, hey, you can always put your money in and borrow from it if you need it in the future. Today, we don't talk about that at all because this is the only nest egg that most people have. And then maximizing that company contribution. How much is the company putting in? Are we doing a stretch match? Instead of doing dollar for dollar up to 3%, are we doing 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% or 25 cents on the dollar up to 8% to try to get people to maximize their contributions? And why is this so important for us to get people to have better outcomes at retirement? Because the older workforce, unfortunately, costs us additional money. This chart looks really complex, but let's look at the left-hand side where it says age. And if you go down, this employer happens to have people over age 62 to age 70. And let's look at the age 64. This employer has 11 individuals that are age 64. And unfortunately, only 1.2% of them are actually expected to retire this year. That means that there's a delay of 9.8 of those employees. If they were to get those employees to retire on time, there was a savings of $32,000 for the employer in health insurance benefits and other benefits. Delaying that costs them $32,000. If you add the number of employees that are not going to make it, that 9.8, in this case, this employer has an additional cost of about $319,000. Now, if you look at all of these participants over the age of 62, you can see this year, this employer, by not having these employees retire on time, has a potential net liability of $1.5 million. And this is why retirement planning is so important. We want to make sure that our employees are able to retire on time because ideally, in not doing so, we may find that that employee costs us additional money. But here's a new thing that's happened that I think a lot of employers have missed. We have a new generation of employees coming into the workforce, and we know that we have to try to provide them with a retirement income. And so we're trying to maximize the contribution or opt them into auto enrollment at 3 or 4%. But what we're finding is that younger population, because they have a longer period of time, we may be actually overfunding their retirement plan. So here's an example of an employer that has people under the age of 30, 30 to 44, 45 to 59, and people over the age of 60. Their retirement income goal was 75% replacement. And you'll notice that the majority of employees under the age of 44 are actually going to have more than 100% of their income replaced at retirement. So when we start to look at the different generations within our organization, we can see that our 60-year-olds are having more difficulty replacing that income, but the individuals under the age of 44 may actually be overfunding their retirement plan. So this then begs the question, is there a way to reallocate the benefit dollar from overfunding a retirement plan to provide additional meaningful, relevant benefits that may be more important to those individuals under the age of 44? Brandon, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the meaningful benefits that you're seeing on healthcare.
Great. Thanks so much, Jamie. It's super interesting. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different areas around employee benefits and healthcare. So kind of the roadmap of where we're going. We're talking a little bit about trends of what we're seeing in California, a little bit about high deductible health plans, and Jamie will have some additional comments on that. And then as well as what are benefits outside of the core benefits that we're seeing. So we always think of medical, dental, vision, life, and disability as kind of our core package. So what are we seeing outside of that that groups are offering or considering offering? This slide looks like a lot of information. I'm going to talk through this briefly. So obviously things going on in California. Kaiser continues to expand. They're continuing to take a large portion of the market. In small group, if you have less than 100 full-time eligible employees, you do have options of combining them with another carrier, and there's a lot of flexibility to do that through California Choice. If you're a large group with over 100 employees, you can split them with your major carrier, but there's issues with participation. I know many of you have experienced this before or have experienced this when you're looking at them as an option, and it can also impact your overall cost. But we do see Kaiser as a continuing trend, and everyone's trying to find out if they can offer it or if it does or doesn't make sense to their total financial picture. ACO, HMO networks, so these are called accountable care organizations. All of the major carriers, Anthem Blue Cross and Cigna, they all are offering these networks. They're smaller networks, but the idea is that they're high quality providers. We see these growing in popularity a lot and becoming a lot more prevalent as a base plan offering. If you haven't looked at this in the last couple of years, it's definitely becoming more and more competitive. High deductible health plans with HRAs or HSAs. I'll talk about this a little bit, but this has kind of been, it seems like it started to be remarketed as a new thing that we're seeing become more and more popular, having HRAs behind a higher deductible plan to manage costs. This can work well for all Kaiser groups where you're on an HMO-based plan. There are some challenges with it. There's administrative challenges because different type of plan for employees to understand and for you to administer behind the scenes. There also can be issues with transparency with carriers. So sometimes organizations aren't transparent with the main carrier, Kaiser, Anthem, Blue Shield, whoever it is, about how they're handling that funding. And that is an important part of that can be a challenge down the road. Lastly, COVID-19 updates. So our industry, just like everything else, we have been impacted by some of the legislative changes, and some of that goes into your health plan. So a few of those I wanted to just mention briefly. Dependent care FSA elections, we've been getting a lot of questions around this as people either don't have access to care for their dependents or they're not using it and people want to change their elections. There is flexibility in that. So if you have questions around that, let me know. That's something we've been talking a lot with our clients about. Special enrollment periods. A lot of the carriers last month gave you the option of enrolling people under a special enrollment period to get through this crisis. So if you didn't take advantage of that, or you think that would be of interest for some of your employees, that probably is still an interest or still an option to retro enroll some people. Maintain benefits for furloughed or reduced hour employees. All the carriers pretty much across the board are giving you flexibility in this. So if you want to try and maintain benefits, that probably is an option for you. Most of the carriers also have extended grace periods on their premiums. So if your school is in a position where you're trying to manage your cash flow and postpone some of those payments, there probably is flexibility to push those back further than would usually be the case. Lastly, there is a new Section 139 tax code change that allowed employers to start providing these employee care cards. So it functions almost similar to an FSA, but you as the employer can give your employees this debit card with a preloaded balance. It's a tax advantage for you, the employer, and the employees are obviously getting those funds tax-free. So there have been a lot of legislative changes the past few weeks. Just last week, there was another change around COBRA administration and extending the period that people have to elect COBRA, as well as not requiring you to collect premiums necessarily in a timely manner. So very challenging for you, the employer, to try and manage, but that is another change that just came through last week. So there have been a ton of moving pieces in this area. If you have any questions on this, feel free to drop it in the chat. We will do a Q&A at the end as well to address some of these questions. So high deductible plans, I want to just clarify this briefly in case this is new. There's a lot of confusion sometimes around these acronyms. So HRAs, HSAs, and FSAs as well. HRAs are health reimbursement accounts. And here's some of the main differences. It's owned by the employer. So if employees don't use this money, you as the employer keep it. It's not an actual liability that you've incurred. HSAs, health savings account, on the other hand, are guaranteed money to the employee. So if you commit to saying, we're going to fund this much during the year, that money is gone. It goes to the employees and they take it with them if they leave the organization. There are a number of other differences, but those are kind of the main differentiators. So one of the things we are seeing in California specifically is some organizations are moving to high deductible plans and adding HRAs, health reimbursement accounts. So on the left, we'll say this is a normal annual premium for a fully insured group. So maybe this is what you're paying now for a year. The HRA model, what it does, it drops you down to a lower grade plan. So say a bronze plan, for example. So your premium, that red box, gets a lot smaller. You do pay administration fees to whoever the administrator is that's administering those debit cards for your employees. And then you make an assumption of what you think your claims are going to be. This is not a known number. This is an estimate. There's a lot of modeling that goes into this, but you estimate what you think your claims are going to be. And at the end of the process, you can get to a point where you say, oh, it looks like on average, we're going to save about, in this example, $40,000. Again, this works well with Kaiser groups that are all Kaiser. If you're with other carriers, it can work, but not all of them offer this type of a plan on an HMO-based platform. We're going to talk about HSAs in a minute, but one of the tough things is a lot of times HSAs are based on PPO networks. So the premium is so much higher that it's hard for the numbers to work out at the end of the day. But situations like this, these HRAs, if they can be combined on an HMO-based network, this is something we're starting to see more of, and it is an option out there to try and take a different approach to manage your costs. As I mentioned, there's a couple of pieces to take into consideration with this. It is a change for employees, it's a change for you administratively, but it is kind of an interesting concept that we are seeing groups consider and look into. I want to talk a little bit about plan prevalence, California versus the rest of the country. So you know this already, but we are completely our own animal here in California. So you'll see there HMOs nationally, only 16%, only a few states have HMOs similar to California. Whereas you'll see there PPOs nationally, almost everyone else in the country has PPOs instead. High deductible health plans similarly are much more common in other states, primarily just because, again, they're based on PPO-based networks. So in California, they're not as prevalent because our HMOs are so much more affordable. So I want to hand it over back to Jamie to talk a little about how these HSAs and high deductible plans can work and some of the tax advantage features associated with them.
Great, thanks. So I think something that's really interesting is that most people think about retirement and they think about, oh, I want to go on trips, I want to go visit my grandchildren, and they think about the essentials. I need to be able to turn on my lights and go food shopping. But one of the things that they totally forget about is healthcare costs. Healthcare costs are the #1 threat to your retirement account. And healthcare costs are one of the reasons that employers are starting to move to the high deductible healthcare plan, adding the HSA, that health savings account. 75% of employers are actually viewing the health savings account as a retirement benefit because of these statistics. So a healthy 65-year-old couple today is anticipated to spend about $321,000 in Medicare premiums alone. Medicare premiums are means tested. That means depending on your modified adjusted gross income will determine what your Medicare premiums are going to be. Now that $321,000 has nothing to do with the out-of-pocket expenses that you may have in retirement with healthcare. So when you start to think about the average employee's retirement account balance of being around $100,000, and you recognize that the average individual is going to probably need $100,000 and some for Medicare premiums alone, you can start to see why employers are starting to say, when we're talking about retirement, we need to incorporate the healthcare cost conversation into it because it's the #1 threat to that retirement account. The value of the HSAs, I'll have you flip to the next page there, Brandon, is that employees can make contributions into them that are federal tax deductible. The contributions also grow tax deferred from a federal standpoint. And if they withdraw them for medical expenses, which we know we're going to have in retirement, they come out tax-free. So they are a triple tax-free investment option for healthcare expenses in retirement. They're like a 403B or 401k plan on steroids because they're triple tax-free as opposed to double. You can make contributions into them. The dollar amounts that are in them carry over year after year, so it's not a use it or lose it like a flexible spending account. They're not attached to your modified adjusted gross income, which means distributions from your HSA at retirement are not applied to Medicare means testing. And employers can also make contributions into HSAs as well. And that's why employers are viewing these as retirement benefits. If at age 65 you decide I don't have any medical expenses, you can take these dollars out in your tax just as ordinary income, very similar to your retirement account. There are no required minimum distributions. So those of you that reach the ripe age of 70 and a half, and now it's going to be age 72, you're not required to take a minimum distribution on these accounts. So as we move forward, employers are starting to say, this is a more efficient way to save for healthcare expenses. So example, somebody needs $245,000, they're in a 25% tax bracket. They would need to have saved $306,000 in their 403B or 401k. Had they saved it in their HSA account because of that tax savings, there's a savings of $61,000 to that employee because they only had to save $245,000. I say only, but the reality is that our younger population that may be overfunding their 401k, this may be a more advantageous place for them to save for healthcare expenses in retirement. So if we flip to the next page, some of our employers are saying, okay, we have a salaried employee making $65,000 a year. This employee wants to save 10% of their salary. We have a company contribution. And so you can see when they save the $6,500 with a company contribution, they have $8,300 a year in savings towards retirement. Let's imagine that we reallocated some of those dollars and that employee saved the same amount, that's $6,500, but put the maximum amount into the 401k or 403b to get that match, so $3,500. Put an additional contribution into the HSA of $3,000, and the employer made a contribution of $1,000. Now you've got an employee that was able to save $9,300 that year, and yet out of their pocket, they're only experiencing that $6,500, and it's actually less than that because of the tax savings they have on the HSA contributions. So again, that's one of the reasons we're starting to see employers view these as kind of the convergence of health and wealth and building a retirement account that addresses both.
Thanks so much, Jamie. So we're going to wrap up the benefits section here, and then we'll talk a little bit about other outside of core benefits pieces as well. A real quick note, it's just some data around self-funding. We get a lot of questions about, should we look at self-funding our plans to address cost? Are there other alternative funding options we should look at? So this is some benchmarking data to hopefully put this in perspective a little bit. So there is, again, a little bit of a discrepancy between what we see nationally versus California. And again, it's because of the PPO versus HMO market. So you'll see here nationally, for organizations, 50 to 500 employees, we'll say. Nationally, 50 to 200, about 18% of organizations would consider self-funding. 200 to 500 employees, that number goes up to about 41%, so much more common. Whereas in California, you see those percentages stay really low. 200 to 500, only about 16% of employers, and 50 to 200, about 12%. You can look into it. There are ways to do it, but for it to financially make sense, it's just not as compelling here in California. It's a lot tougher to make the numbers work. I did want to share a little bit of data around renewal increases just over the past couple of years. I'm sure you've experienced this as well. This is for a large group or one of the major carriers. These are their pooled renewals over the past couple of years. So just to kind of put things in perspective, interestingly enough, there's been a lot of dialogue internally around this virus and what this is going to do to renewal increases. And I think initially everyone was kind of feeling like, next year there's going to be massive increases because of all the extra medical needs and everything in the market right now. But we've actually gotten some actuarial data around this, and it's interesting because some of the projections are actually disagreeing with that. They're saying that because no one is going for services right now, everyone is staying away from these medical facilities, that overall demand has actually gone down significantly the past month or two, and is expected to stay pretty low for the rest of the year. So we're very interested to see what that does to renewal increases, especially next year. Part of that is going to be pent-up demand that may get caught up later in the year or early next year. But it's been really interesting to kind of see some of the numbers run around that. So we'll be curious to see where that ends up landing. This is another chart just showing renewal increases by different plan types. So you'll see CDHPs, which is the same as high deductible health plans. Sometimes those have trended lower than the other types of plans, but have made up for it in other years. In general, we do see high deductible plans receiving slightly lower renewals. Jamie talked about this a little bit as well. So just kind of from the employee benefits perspective, it is interesting as well to think about how these benefits might apply to different generations. So obviously with our boomer generation, there's more concern around Medicare, maybe concerns around identity theft, retirement education, and potentially even elder care for parents and family. Gen Xers, there may be more interest around the additional bullet here we add is around genomic testing. So there's some interesting new benefits around trying to determine your likelihood or propensity for various types of cancer, and then getting support around that, as that's more of a discussion now more than ever, it seems, as well as fertility benefits. So there's a number of external third parties that have benefit programs now around infertility testing and services that could be an added benefit for the population. As we move towards millennials and Gen Zs, one of the things that there's a lot of talk around the industry is around tuition reimbursement, as well as assisting with student loan debt. There's actually this year, one of the regulations that changed was that there's now an opportunity to get for that to be recognized taxable expense if you decide to help pay down some of your employees to contribute towards their student debt. That was a new regulation that'll be just for this year for the moment it's been approved. And again, for Gen Zs, one of the things we added here is the idea of narrow network plans and cash in lieu. So some people who are just entering the workforce, they probably don't care about having the largest provider network. They may be fine with the narrower network that's less expensive out of their premium, and potentially even a higher deductible that's less premium for them out of pocket. And then the idea of cash in lieu. So you have to be a little bit careful with this with ACA regulations and affordability, but you can give people cash instead of having them opt into your benefits. So maybe they're at a place where they can stay on their parents' plans for a couple of years, or they're getting insurance elsewhere, and maybe it's cheaper for you as an organization to have them on someone else's plan. So those are just some ideas around different generational considerations. This slide is a lot, but the idea being that there's a lot of different things outside of your core employee benefits. So thinking about things like wellness, mental health, financial wellness, student loan refinancing, return to work support, tuition reimbursement, elder and dependent care, perk discount programs, Medicare support, fertility benefit, and cash in lieu. Again, our idea here, and this list is expansive. There is a resource we were talking about internally last week that I think is about 5 pages of just bullets of all the different types of benefits you could look at for employees. But the idea is just for us to try and start thinking about this a little bit more outside of just medical, dental, vision, life. And I think especially with younger employees, some of these items really stand out to them as an attractive thing. And when people come in with large amounts of student debt and other family situations they're dealing with, some of those things stand out a lot more than just having a lower deductible. So we, Martha helped us. We surveyed the group, the members, maybe about a month ago now, and kind of asked what are the things that you're doing at your organization? What are things that you feel like are helpful or they're outside of the box? And these are some of the main responses that came back. And I think I also have a survey for this. Let me get up to the poll. I really like some of the ideas on here that we heard around using some of the school facilities, having access to reduced lunch or free lunches, gym memberships, and a couple of other things. So I'll go ahead and add that other poll. We'd be curious to get your feedback if there's any of these benefits that you feel like would be maybe one that you would be most interested in for your organization. So you should see the poll up on your screen now, and I'll share those results once they come in. So a lot of different options: physical wellness, financial wellness, access to school facilities, free or discounted lunch, professional development budget, mental health benefits, tuition or student loan contributions, infertility and family support, employee discount programs, and cash in lieu of benefits. And I'll give that just a second while everyone is responding. Looks like we're at about half. We'll wait for a couple more people. Okay, so we're about just about 80%. I'll go ahead and share that. So you should see the results on your screen there. So it looks like the one area of most interest is tuition or student loan contributions. Cash in lieu of benefits. Also, a lot of people had interest around that. I mentioned this before, but the only thing with cash in lieu is just be careful with your other contribution allocations. You just have to be a little bit careful for some ACA regulations, but your broker should be able to walk you through that. It's not that complicated, it's just something to pay attention to. The student loan contributions, yeah, we do see a lot of interest around that. I think whenever we talk about additional benefits, I think that is the area we get the most kind of feedback and questions on. I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to circle back to that since there was so much interest in that. So part of the CARES Act does allow this year for a one-time tax break for employer contributions up to $5,250 towards student loan debt for each employee. We would love to see this this act, be extended beyond this year. Obviously, right now it's just a one-time thing, but a really interesting change in legislation and kind of aligns with what we've been hearing with people having interest. So I'll hand it back over to Jamie if you want to talk through some of these additional areas real quick, Jamie.
Sure, thanks. So I thought it was interesting in the first poll, one of the items that popped up was engagement and education around the benefits that you offer. And that's difficult, right? Because we're all very busy. We have a lot going on. You've got Brandon with 2 little kids at home. The reality is to get people engaged, you want to make sure that you have benefits that they're interested in. And so we are definitely seeing a trend in kind of that financial wellness package. And that financial wellness package comes with education, student loan debt repayment, utilizing the HSA. Emergency savings accounts are something that most employers aren't really thinking about, but are something that most employees really value. Helping them set up a 529 plan for their children. These are benefits that you can offer without an additional cost to you as an employer. So what I always say to employees is that you can't save for the future in the future. So as an employer, the more education you can give to an employee around the value of saving for long-term goals, the better off they're going to be. And how do you kind of start that conversation? Next page. You want to make sure that each school is going to be unique. You want to look at the demographics of the people within your organization, their income, understanding kind of their debt. If they're newly out of school, we know what their debt is. We know college tuition debt. How are they saving in any of the plans that you have available to them in the 403B or 401k plan? And how are you making contributions into or towards any of the benefits that are being offered, whether it's health insurance or retirement benefits or student loan debt repayments? What does that all mean? And when you analyze all of that information, and really I'll have you flip to the next one, I find it really interesting that people try to solve a problem without understanding the actual issue. So what I would make sure you do before you allocate any of your dollars to any of these items that we talked about today, and I urge you to kind of think outside the box and be forward-looking just like you are today by attending this. Understand the risks and costs associated with it. And the way that you're going to do that is to make sure that you understand the data. Get a report from your retirement plan. See, are you overfunding, over-contributing for the younger population? Get an understanding of your demographics. Are they younger? Are they older? Are they middle-aged? Do they have children that they're trying to save for save for college tuition, or do they have college tuition that they're paying off? There's a rising group of people over the age of 60 filing for bankruptcy, and the reason is because they've taken on their children's college debt. So don't be surprised if you survey your employee population and you find the people with the highest college debt are those over the age of 60 because they're paying their kids' college debt. And last but not least, try to keep it simple. The more complicated we get, the harder it is to explain the benefit, and ultimately what happens is then they don't see it as a benefit. So understand your data and then try to build the benefits that are best for your organization. We'll stop there and see if there's any questions we can answer.
there's a couple questions. Jamie, can you see the chat? I have it pulled up here. Do you have access to that?
Sorry, I can't see it, no.
Okay. There's a question here about are the HSAs taxable at the state level?
Okay, California is one of those funky states. There's only 2 states out of 50 that they are tax-free from a federal, but they are taxable from a state. So your contributions are after state taxes and your earnings are after state taxes. So just keep that in mind. You don't get the triple tax-free from the state in California. Outside of California, you do. And New Jersey, you don't get it. And we live in New Jersey, so we don't get it here either.
Thanks so much. And Angela added a comment here. Thanks, Angela, about limited FSAs. So yes, if you are offering an HSA, you can still offer an FSA, but it's limited to only dental and vision. Angela is correct.
There are, and Brandon, you would know better than I would because the state of California is unique from the healthcare. But there are ways that you can offer an HSA and an HRA, and that can sometimes be a way to bridge premium expenses as well as making sure that employees don't have an additional expense coming from out-of-pocket expenses. But
yes, yeah, and we have some clients that they'll offer HSAs and HRAs and give people the choice. It usually depends a lot on how the employer is going to fund it. So if the employer is funding, you can fund or not fund HSAs. It can just be employees can just sign up and contribute their own funds pre-tax, but oftentimes employers will fund it to incentivize enrollment because sometimes the premiums can be lower. Any other questions? You can send them in the chat. I don't know if we have the ability to unmute people. So
I think we can unmute people.
Okay, let me see.
Yeah, I can. I just unmuted everybody.
Hey, you do your weekend news, Colby.
So if you want to be muted, you'll have to remute yourself. But if you have a question, you can ask it without typing it in. So one of the things that when Jamie and Brandon and I started talking about,
You know exactly what you're supposed to do, right? I'm not going to help you. You're a good boy, and I know how.
working from home. We started talking about this because of all the discussion that was going on in our groups around the high cost of housing and schools being so frustrated because they wanted to help their employees with housing, but really couldn't. And so we said, really start by what you're already paying and making sure that you're doing it efficiently. And I just kind of wanted to know, is anybody, and you can put this in the chat if you want to, is anybody doing anything on housing? Or does that suddenly seem like in this era of COVID that that's now, you know, really?
Do you have the baby? Do you have the baby?
Martha, we don't do anything directly related to housing, but if we are recruiting new faculty and they're moving cross country or they're moving from a different state, then we offer a stipend, a moving stipend.
Mm-hmm.
And we aren't doing anything on housing so much as doing actual direct, helping people figure out how to commute in either collectively or in an effective, how to actually commute, not just give them a stipend to commute, but actually say, rather than take the bus, we're going to arrange shuttles, you know, what we're going to do to actually get people to work in a less stressful way. So it's not directly addressing housing. I think that what I've experienced in the past is when you share, particularly in California, because we are so HMO oriented and it's usually age banded, when you start sharing with staff the value of their benefits, of their individual benefits, they can't help but compare. And it always seems to skew toward an older workforce because in an HMO, they have a greater value, right? So we play with it, and no matter what, it always just looks like a certain segment of our workforce gets a greater benefit, because if you've been there longer, you have a bigger retirement benefit. If you, the more you make, the older you are, it always seems to kind of skew a particular way that younger individuals and workers don't like. And so a lot of times we end up scuttling, we put together these great spreadsheets or worksheets or pie charts or whatever to try to share the value of benefits. And it always looks like somebody's getting more. It's fair to everybody, except for it's a little bit fairer than most. Yeah. And it's upsetting. Staff get upset.
Yeah. So, and will you, until you're willing and or able to increase that investment and then to go to something that's more of an option, it always is going to look that way. Your expense is simply going to be higher.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because benefits are valuable and they are expensive, but it's hard to get that appreciation. And then staff do want it in lieu, and trying to explain the tax ramifications of them taking cash in lieu. They don't care, particularly younger people. Like, just give me the money. Don't talk to me about tax ramifications.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I think the age banded piece is really tough. I think you're absolutely right. When you're in those small group age banded rates, it doesn't look fair. It's tough to make it a helpful, full understanding of everything. Definitely.
Thing that we've seen work well for employers that have thought about giving a benefit statement is to model those benefit statements out so that they compare apples to apples. So to compare a 65-year-old to a 25-year-old is difficult, but when you put them both at age 65, that 25-year-old then sees, wow, these benefits are really valuable when I'm at the same age as the 65-year-old. So that might be something to think about. Hey, Brandon, do you see any more questions coming in?
Let me see. I don't think I see anything on the chat.
Hey, Brandon.
Yeah.
Quick question. With this new normal, do you
we're overtime anyway.
Do you see the reimbursement of cell phone and internet as being a normal benefit being offered going forward?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I know, I think it depends on the organization and everyone's budgets, right? Everyone's in such a strange place right now of what is this year like? What does next year look like? We are seeing more discussion around that and trying to see where they're going to shift costs. Because in some organizations, other costs have gone down because everyone's working remote now. So it's changed. So I do see discussion around that. I don't think that is something that we've seen across the board be something that everyone is adopting, but I definitely think it's something everyone's talking about and trying to decide how much they're going to step up and pick up in this situation. It's a good question.
We have time for one more question, I think. I hate to cut this short, but.
I'd be curious, jumping off your question, Angela, how, for everyone else maybe that's dialed in, is that something that you've decided to pick up or change your policy on as a result of everyone working from home now, or is everything status quo for the time being?
No, we're picking it up because it's pretty clear on the, what's the labor code 2802 that, we really need, it's required. I mean, you do that because it is an expense.
We're providing the same flat stipend.
Is the legislature going to move? Because to me, your cell phone, internet, it's kind of like your
hi, Joyce, it's Bridget. The number is 2198201.
So that's what I'm more like, is the legislation moving? It's like an energy bill. It's like your, land and internets are just a normal expense, household expense. And so we don't have to reimburse.
I think that's where I struggle too, Angela. Is it really an expense at all? I have not incurred additional expense for these last 2 months working from home. It's still my same cell phone bill, the unlimited, still my same Wi-Fi. I'm not incurring.
And it's not additional though. It's not additional expense.
Exactly. So we're really struggling with that. We're
That
really
doesn't
struggling with that.
But
Are
it
we,
doesn't matter if it's
why do you,
additional.
why do you say that?
Because it's Labor Code 2802 is saying employees should get reimbursed for any expenses that they have to use, business expense that they have to use to do their job. And now with distance learning and teleworking, you need to have your phone, you need to have your internet, and those are legitimate business expenses.
Right, sort of like mileage reimbursement. or
Yeah,
something
it's just
like
an
that.
extension of mileage reimbursement, per diem when you go on trips. It's just an extension of that.
You're just using your own device or your own,
Yeah, it's not new. We should have been doing it probably even before.
Probably if that's the case, yeah.
We should, but then what's a reasonable amount?
Right.
I'm going to take this opportunity actually because maybe this is a good segue into the next session. So the next general session is Lieber Cassidy and laws that are impacting California schools now. And so we'll be finishing up today with Michael and Donna. So that's going to start at noon. So that'll give you time to get some water, to take a little break and get into that room by noon. Maybe order your Grubhub if you haven't done that already. And thank you very much, Jamie and Brandon. And thanks to everybody. And I will see you in the general session.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.